Welcome back to the presentation. We're going to jump right into the characteristics of Cantonese speech-language impairment. Some hallmarks of Cantonese SLI include using significantly few aspect markers in oral discourse, which is dropping the bound morpheme, difficulties with understanding who object questions, which is when questions are not asked through the subject's perspective. Children with SLI seem to have fewer passive sentences and less complex classifiers. Their working memory seemed to be poor, which they also struggle in sentence repetition task. So how do we diagnose LI with Cantonese English speaking children? The answer is by using converging evidence. We use converging evidence to determine speech and language services eligibility for bilingual children so that we have more information on the child's language abilities across languages. I would like to emphasize that when choosing standardized assessment for bilingual children, we need to review the evidence of diagnostic accuracy provided in the manual and its quality, specifically looking for their sensitivity and specificity. And to make sure that the assessment tools include dual language learners in the normative sample. It is also important to interpret the assessment information using confidence intervals. If a child has a score whose confidence interval includes the cutoff score, you might want to look more into other areas of language performance. And today, from all the assessment tools, I would like to focus on bilingual narrative language sample analysis. Bilingual language sample analysis offers multiple advantages for assessing dual language learners. It simultaneously indexes multiple expressive language domains and can incorporate least bias assessment principle by using culturally appropriate picture storybook. In order to incorporate least biased assessment principle, we need to first understand the language and cultural specific features of Cantonese. As I've mentioned before, Cantonese relies on high context communication. Once you have established the referential clarity, some morphological rules are optional. And pronoun omissions are a very common one in Cantonese. Once you have established a mutual understanding on the context, the subject of the sentence can be dropped. In the earlier slides, we have also talked about how future aspect markers are optional when you use precise temporal adverbials. Another one is that sometimes connectives can also be optional, as it is expected that the listeners to implicitly encode the relations between the clause. This would only make sense when you're using a complex syntactic structure and when the communicators have a mutual understanding of the context. Other than these specific morphological features, Cantonese also relies heavily on intonation patterns and prosodic elements to segment utterances. Now let's switch gears to narrative development for Cantonese speaking children. To et al. Did a study on narrative assessment with Cantonese speaking children. They used a story retell task. Both Cantonese children who are typically developing and with speech-language impairment participated in the study, and the researchers measured each child's performance in 4 domains: syntactic complexity, semantic score, referencing, and connective use. They suggested a general trend of narrative development for typically developing Cantonese children. They found that for children who are in kindergarten to 3rd grade, connectives are dominant device to achieve syntactic complexity. Kindergarten children also tend to use unclear referential expression, as characterized by not introducing or switching referent throughout the story. But these skills are developed quickly through 1st to 3rd grade. For children who are in 3rd to 6th grade, they have found that they tended to use more sophisticated sentence with a wider set of syntactic structure and less with connectives, which we also just discussed that it is a specific feature of Cantonese. In the Toe et al. Study, they found that Cantonese-speaking children with SLI performed significantly poor than their typically developing peers. Cantonese-speaking children with SLI spoke with significantly less syntactic complexity in their sentences. Their sentences remained in SVO structure with, rarely had any clauses or temporal adverbial phrases attached to the sentences. For example, CSLI children would say they were playing, but their typically developing same age peers might describe the pictures as a group of boys and girls played on the beach happily. In semantic domain, children with CSLI tends to use vocabulary that served a general purpose than specific lexical items. In a story retell task, CSLI children tended to say, "They got her back," instead of using the word rescue. In terms of connectives, it is tightly linked with the reference domain. The study suggested that connectives are frequently used in CSLI children to compensate for the deficits in syntactic complexity. When referential clarity is established in the story retell, it is expected that the listeners will implicitly encode the relation between the clauses. For example, for the sentence here, even if he can't, he still has to go. In the transcription, even if was not explicitly stated in the sentence, just because the referential clarity has already established. And lastly, in terms of reference, CSLI children had difficulty with switching and introducing reference, as characterized by using third-person pronoun throughout the story. Since third-person pronoun is not gender-specific in Cantonese, overusing them without establishing the reference can cause confusion to the listeners and leave the story fragmented and unclear. To and his colleagues also commented that children with Cantonese SLI show vulnerabilities that are similar to those of their English-speaking counterparts, which kind of implied that children with CSLI may also have difficulty with establishing clear macro structure of the story and may have poor working memory. So now let's look at narrative language sample for Mandarin SLI. So Hao and his colleagues have done a study on comparing the performances on Mandarin SLI with English SLI children on a storytelling task. The study suggested that both Mandarin SLI children and English SLI children have weak macrostructure elements, including description of characters, setting, consequences of the story, etc. Mandarin SLI children had low syntactic complexity as characterized by low usage of passive voice, classifiers, and aspect markers to mark tenses in past tense and present perfect tense. They tended to use simpler sentences that remain in SVO structure with few clauses or adverbial phrases, and their sentences were less densely packed with information. Hao and colleagues also suggested that Mandarin SLI children produce a comparable MLU in words as their same age peers, but they are more likely to repeatedly use the same words over and over again throughout the storytelling task, which results in low lexical diversity. Combining the hallmarks of Cantonese SLI and evidence in narrative language sample analysis in children who have Cantonese, Mandarin, and English SLI, the following would be something to look for during testing and narrative language sample analysis. So for the language sample or testing that we do in Chinese, first of all, we would see establishing referential clarity and macro structure elements in narrative tests would be a significant deficit because regardless of the dominant language of the child, since they are the areas that children with SLI struggle with. Some language-specific hallmarks of SLI include omission or low usage of aspect markers in Chinese, using vocabulary that serves a general purpose than specific lexical items, and forming simple SVO sentences with low usage of clauses and adverbial phrases. A sentence repetition task can also highlight the child's working memory, which is an area that children with SLI struggle with. I would also like to highlight the fact that there is conflicting data with using MLU in words, the ability of using passive voice and complex classifiers as indicators of SLI in Chinese language sample. Regarding MLU in words, some research has found that children with Chinese SLI might use a comparable amount of words as they're typically developing same-age peers. Using passive voice or using complex classifiers are highly dependent on how much language input and exposure the children have. And some research has suggested that these two features of language are rarely used in child-adult interactions, which implies that they might not be accurate indicators of Chinese SLI. And in English testing and narrative language sample in English with bilingual children, it is expected to see, again, lack of referential clarity and lack of microstructure elements in the story, and then poor performance in sentence repetition um, due to working memory deficits. In monolingual English children, some hallmarks of SLI in narrative language samples are looking for subject-verb agreement and inflections in words. However, because of the Chinese language influence, omissions and errors on plurals, articles, verb inflections, copula, and auxiliary should be expected and might not be a good indicators of SLI because these are language differences. And this is why it is important to get language sample in both languages. Research has also suggested that verb inflections are later developing in Chinese speakers in their English language development. Verb inflections might be a good target for dynamic assessment for Chinese English bilingual children and for dual language learners as to observe the amount of prompting or cueing you might need to give to acquire these language specific features in English. However, I must state the fact that both research done by To et al. And Hao et al. Reported narrative language sample analysis were a high sensitivity, low specificity assessment tool on measuring language complexity. Problems of having, high sensitivity and low specificity put these children at increased risk of overdiagnosis. They suggested to use narrative language sample analysis in conjunction with other language measures, such as standardized assessments and dynamic assessments. Other than that, both studies had a small sample size. They recruited participants in Hong Kong and Shanghai, and there was little to no replication on research like this. Participants were not bilingual. They either spoke Mandarin or Cantonese and do not represent Chinese English bilingual children in the United States. And therefore, we must approach this information with caution and make a case with converging evidence, because if we follow typical SLI hallmarks, we put ourselves at risk of over-identifying children with SLI. And in order to avoid over-identification, it is also important to understand home language attrition and factors affecting bilingual language acquisition. Hakuta and DeAndrea suggested that maintenance is associated with adult language practice at home rather than language attitudes or language choice outside home, which means in order to preserve home language and culture, we as SLP need to encourage parents to continue using home language at home. Other factor is having a school-aged older sibling at home. In the study of Bridges and Hoff 2014, they found that having a school-aged older sibling increases mother's use of English with the toddler. And toddlers without a school-aged sibling had more advanced native language skills. In that case, in the study was Spanish, than the toddlers with a school-aged older sibling, where English were mainly spoken. The third factor is a shift in language exposure and the educational model that the child is in. Barragan et al. Suggested that language attrition is common in children who experienced a shift in language exposure from home language to school language, in particular for English-only programs, and could explain the decrease in scores with age in their home language. And the children in English-only education might demonstrate protracted development, especially for academic purposes. Language input and exposure is key to preserve home language and to prevent first language attrition. However, having language input alone without the child actively using the language does not lead to any maintenance or development of the home language. I believe that both home language input and output are tightly linked together with the external factors that are listed in the graph in here. I also want to mention that parental beliefs can play a huge role in bilingual language development. To Chinese individuals who speak Cantonese and who are born and raised in Hong Kong, English is a prestigious language. It is seen to be more superior and better than Cantonese, our home language. When I was young, when I was studying back in Hong Kong, my parents always emphasized the fact that I need to have very proficient English or I would not be successful in the future in life. This idea and concept might still persist in some first generation Chinese Americans, and in that case, their home language might not be as valued. And here, other than external factors, the age of the child acquiring English would also be a huge factor of his language proficiency. This would be something to take into account of when we're doing assessment and during the parent interviewing. Cultural perspective not only affect the language input and output of the child, but also contribute to families' perception and decision on receiving services. A study that was done in 1997 interviewed Chinese Americans who spoke Cantonese and English on their perspective of speech disorder. And a majority of them believed that speech disorder would improve by increased effort from a child. Qian and his colleagues also suggested that Chinese individuals tend to delay in seeking for help and services because of concerns about losing reputation or face in their family or in their community. Religious beliefs and their beliefs in medicine and healthcare can also play a big role in their perspective of communication disorders. Some might believe that a disability is a punishment to the disabled person's parents or their past life sins. Some might believe that disability is an imbalance in energy and might seek help in traditional Chinese medicine like acupuncture or herbal tea instead of seeking westernized medical help. I encourage you to keep an open mind and to have cultural humility when working with families whose values are not aligned with yours. In a bilingual SLP class that I'm currently taking with Dr. Restrepo and Victoria Clark at ASU, we discussed cultural beliefs that can impact interactions with our clients and their families. I was curious about how the internet portrays Chinese culture, and here is the summary of what I found as I was searching on the internet. They include valuing extended family more than small family, interdependence, nurture young, time given, differentiated rights, ownership control, indirect communication style, loud communication, and high context communication. Now I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I attended school in Hong Kong until I was a freshman in high school. And I moved to the United States when I was 15 and restarted my freshman year in Illinois. My family sent me to the US, and our family friend, who was also a first generation immigrant, was my foster family and parent for my high school years. Both of my parents and my younger sisters are still residing in Hong Kong, and here are the beliefs and values that I was raised in. As you can see, there are only 3 overlapping beliefs that I have with what the internet might think are the Chinese beliefs. Those include time given, ownership control, and high context communication. I guess my case is somewhat different, as Hong Kong was a colony of the UK for 99 years, which might have somewhat have some impact on the values that my parents have adopted when raising me. However, my family still carry many traditional Chinese beliefs, especially in showing respect to elderlies and people who are in authority. But my parents always taught me to speak quietly but confidently, to be bold and brave, to be independent, and even though I'm a girl, I can achieve anything that I set my mind to. As I get more acculturated in the American society, I realize that personal experiences take a huge part of what I actually believe in and what my values are. I encourage you to do research on your culturally and linguistically diverse clients' cultural values, but also keep an open mind to listen to and really get to know your clients. As you do this, you will not only grow to respect your clients more, but you will see growth in their communication, which is vital to our role as speech language pathologists. I'm so grateful you attended my presentation, and I hope that you have learned more about the beauty of Chinese languages and culture. These information might be a lot to take in, but I have provided a handout and resource package for you, and you can review these videos as many times as you want for your reference in the future. Please don't forget to fill out the post-presentation survey because your feedback and comments are super valuable to me. I also want to use this time to thank my capstone mentor, Dr. Restrepo, for her guidance, my school internship supervisor, Mark Severino, who has inspired me in many different ways regarding assessing and treating bilingual children with SLI, and also my dearest friend, RJ Risueño, for helping me with final edits for this presentation. Please feel free to contact me with any questions, or I'm open to keep this conversation going and have more discussion on this topic. My email is jfeng2@asu.edu. Thank you so much. Bye.